let's look at specifically for live hacking events. So, you mentioned that you're focusing on high and critical bugs, and in live hacking events, you don't get to pick your target, right? Which I understand you're normally pretty picky about, because you have a specific set of a very particular set of skills that
I was going to say if you weren't.
Yeah, exactly. What's up, y'all? We've got an excellent episode for you today. Our guest is Alex Chapman, a bug bounty hunter renowned for his critical vulnerabilities at live hacking events and his extremely detailed reports. We talked to him about everything ranging from his red teaming experience to how to be a full-time bug bounty hunter to how to find these crazy vulns, and I think you're really going to enjoy the episode. But before we dive in, I want to remind you to head over to ctbb.show and drop your email there. We're trying to grow that newsletter so that we can stay in touch with you all and so that you don't miss an episode. Without further ado, Alex Chapman. Alex, thanks for coming on the pod, dude.
Hey, how are you doing?
Pretty great, dude. This is going to be a really cool episode, I think. I've admired your hacking from afar and from close at a bug collision in January. And so I'm excited this time to pick your brain and kind of get some of those techniques out of you. I was hoping we could start today a little bit with a little bit of your InfoSec history and kind of talk to us about how the hacker that is now AJX Chapman has evolved to where he is today.
Yeah, sure. So I guess I'm a bit of an old timer, certainly in the bug bounty crowd. I've been doing kind of in professional security for, I guess, must be at least 16 years by now.
Wow.
Kind of started straight out of university professionally, but had an interest from when I was about 12, 13. As soon as I could
learn
to program. Yeah, as soon as I could learn to program, I kind of wanted to know how to break things. Mm-hmm. And there wasn't as much information around back then, so kind of had to scrape pieces together from here and there, and then kind of decided it'd be a good idea to do a computer science degree, as you do. Hated it, absolutely hated it.
Yep.
Relatable.
But then found out towards the end of my degree.
Yeah, relatable for sure.
But then at one point we had a guest lecture from some guy who worked for one of the big four, who was a pen tester. I was like, well, you can actually get paid to do this sort of thing. So that was, from then on, that was my goal. Straight out of the university, was into big four because I knew they did pen testing.
Right. Now, when you say big four, is that you're talking about big four accounting firms? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. So
okay.
I went to work for Deloitte.
Okay. Sure.
Specifically in their security team, and was doing pen testing from then on. So I did about a decade of pen testing, 3 years at Deloitte, moved to a smaller consultancy, and that's where I picked up kind of red teaming and security research. Knew nothing about bug bounty at this point, so this was going back to, I don't know, maybe 2016, 2017.
Okay, all right.
And then went to work for Yahoo.
Nice, man. I feel like a lot of good hackers kind of go through Yahoo at some point. I don't know if it's just like the time period of like, Yahoo was a big name earlier on in the bug bounty scene or in the pen testing scene, but
hugely.
I feel like I see so many people that have gone through there. So I've got a couple questions for you. You mentioned that you started programming early on. Was that out of but you didn't really get introduced to hacking until later. Is that right? Or were you studying programming that whole time? Or was there a little bit of hacking in the youth as well? Or?
Certainly a little bit of hacking. Yeah. So kind of looking at war games and...
sure.
Kind of crackme's... I think crackme.de used to exist. I'm not pretty sure that's been dead for a long time.
Crackme.de.
Yeah, I don't know if that's still a thing.
It was, so kind of...
Interesting.
A lot of reverse engineering, specifically on crackme. So kind of a legal outlet for trying to learn these skills.
Gotcha. So it was in college where you were introduced to being able to do this as a job. But that's what you were saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I never in kind of a million years when I was in my early teens, I thought I could get paid to do this. And then just had this epiphany moment. I was like, I can do this.
Yeah.
So that was my mission from then on.
Yeah,
Nice.
dude.
That's awesome.
That's so cool. I sort of remember that moment for me as well, being like, wow, this is actually a career path that I can go down, which was really cool. Because at the same, I started when I was young as well, at 12 or 13, and I kind of went down the black hat route for a while. And I was like, but then I sort of caught a conscience, I was like, oh, actually, this is really damaging systems that I'm working on, trying to cover my tracks, because I wasn't necessarily good enough to really do a good job of covering my tracks. So my track covering was rm-rf/, and so that's kind of when I pivoted off, and then coming into that realization that it can actually be a career. Man, what a mind-boggling thing. So you mentioned you were in CS, but you weren't loving that. Why? What is your opinion on should aspiring hackers go and get a degree versus going training themselves or going through a boot camp, or what?
I think my personal opinion from kind of where we are now in 2023 is I wouldn't bother.
Yeah.
I would apply yourself, learn to program. I think all hackers should know how to program, at least basically.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's a bit of a controversial opinion in some circles.
Yep.
But my view on it is you should know how to program. Or at least should be interested in learning how to program.
Sure.
Let's say it like that. And just apply yourself. Blog a lot. Blog about everything you can. So I actually used to do hiring, and that would be the first thing I would do. If a CV passed screening, I would look the person up on Twitter, try and find their blog, and see what they were interested in.
Yeah.
And people who didn't have blogs would actually be in. I'd have to grill them a lot more in an interview to try and work out what their passion is and what they're interested in. And again, you can make money in bug bounty. You're not going to start out and make the big bucks, but you can get by, and you can again build up an effective CV saying, I hacked this company by this bug, this company by this bug. And to me, that's much more impressive these days than somebody who came out of a degree, spending all their money to get a bit of paper, who actually has next to no real world experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I found that to be very true. I also dropped out of college. And when I went into college, I was kind of doing some hacking adjacent stuff, like stuff that I think now would be considered under the realm of like bug bounty / general InfoSec hacking. And I think that precursor knowledge really helped me find the path that I was looking for. I had already been very interested in like programming and computers and that kind of stuff. And so once I'd seen like this was a route that could be taken, and it was like profitable, and it was like very interesting, and it was very in line with the stuff that I was already doing and already found a lot of enjoyment with, it just seemed like a very natural progression. I'm curious like how far you sort of like deviated from what you would consider like what you were already doing to pivot into bug bounty, or was it kind of that same natural progression?
So going from pen testing and red teaming to bug bounty?
Yeah.
So, it's actually going from more of an audit pen test side of things to bug bounty is a huge world of difference. Like when in the kind of audit space with security, you're reporting absolutely everything and looking for absolutely everything. So you're reporting SSL ciphers and all the stuff that nobody cares about, has no real world impact. But if you don't report it and the client kind of finds out about it, you can get into real trouble.
Right.
And so that's the kind of soul destroying end of pen testing. But then on the red teaming side, I actually got a lot more experience that would be more relatable to bug bounty. And that's kind of actually trying to find and properly exploit bugs in anger. See how far you can get with them and what you can actually do with it. So the bug's no longer theoretical or something that popped up on a scanner. You know 100% that it's there and it can be exploited for this sort of impact. And that, I think, was a big learning point for me, was actually not just CVSS impact, but real world impact. So your scanner says this is a 7.2, so it's obviously high, but what does it actually give you access to? Does the business care about this thing, or is it actually a third-party bit of software or third-party hosted thing that means nothing to them?
Yeah.
And it's things like that. If you can kind of start to bring that experience into the bug bounty side of things, you'll find you get a lot further as well.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Did you find that your time at companies were like really helpful for figuring out that sort of security impact? Because this is something that we've talked about a lot, is like CVSS versus like direct impact, and understanding like security model of a company. And instead of framing your bugs so that you have like a 9.0 CVSS, like that, that's good and stuff, but it really matters more like what's the actual impact? How does this affect the company? How can you frame this so that the company sees the impact the same way that you do? And do you think that like your time at companies and all the red teaming and stuff really helped with that?
Yeah, huge. And that's also, I guess, on the report writing side of things as well, because red team, we used to write kind of 96, 150 page reports.
Wow.
So like when I first started doing bug bounty, I would probably take 4 hours over each report I was writing.
Oh, wow.
And that would be kind of even some
gosh.
basic XSS reports would take me several hours to write because I was going into that level of detail. Okay, that was overkill, but kind of there's still kind of Douglas Day, working with him quite a lot, and he still takes the piss out of me for how much I write in reports and how long it takes me to write a report.
It's
but
really
I still
funny.
like to get that.
Yeah, it's funny because I used to do like the same thing where I would go very, very in depth. I would give them like a full explanation of like, how does this work? What is this doing in the back end? And at a certain point I realized, I was like, wait a second, I'm explaining to these engineers how their own systems work. They don't really need to know. Like for me, this is satisfying, but for them, it's like, okay, skip. Oh, there's the vulnerability.
Yeah. And that's how I fix it, right?
I think also for us as hackers, it's a fun narrative to convey,
huge.
I found, especially on reports that I'm really proud of, I'll go above and beyond on the, or at least on the bugs that I'm really proud of. I go above and beyond on the report because I'm like, I want you to understand what a masterpiece this is.
Yes,
like,
100%. It's when you get the reaction from the program team being like, wow.
Yeah. Dude.
And that's nearly worth any bounty. Just
so satisfying. Okay. Yeah. And I bet you get that a lot, Alex, because
it does certainly happen.
Yeah. And the fact that you acknowledge it definitely means that it happens a lot. Because I've been privy to some of the reports that you've found, specifically at the GitHub event last year. Just what a phenomenal performance that was.
That was.
Yeah. That was a great day, wasn't it?
Yes, that was a good day for me.
Cool. I believe it, man. I believe it. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I wanted to come back to what you said earlier about, hackers should be able to program, or should have an interest in learning programming, or should have an interest in programming. Could you speak to a little bit about how that, just speak to that for our listeners, and also how that integrates with your style of hacking, which is different than most others, I believe.
Yeah, and that's a really good question. I was reflecting on this a little bit earlier. I spend a significant portion of my time hacking in an IDE. I'll be pulling open source repos down, looking through the code, reading the code, trying to find issues and learn basically how a module works, or how this server works that they're doing, or how the protocol works that they're communicating with.
Right.
And without being able to program, that would be next to impossible.
Right.
And that's very specific to my style of hunting. But if you really want to, in my opinion, if you really want to be able to understand a bug, you need to know how it was implemented, what assumptions a programmer would have made to introduce that bug, and ideally how to fix it. Because if you know those three things, you can really hammer home what a bug is, and start to understand where you might find it in other places as well. It's all very well kind of spraying payloads all over a website, but if you don't really understand what's going on in the back end and what's happening to those payloads, then what's the point? You're blindly throwing darts.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I was actually just talking with one of my buddies who's just starting to like get into bug bounty and security and that kind of stuff. and he was going through the Portswigger Web Academy. And he was telling me today that like he's now at a point where he can, if he looks at a vulnerability, he can like 80% of the time figure out what's going on just by like sussing it out and like doing a little fiddling with it. And I think that is so key to really making progress in bug bounty and hacking as a whole, but especially bug bounty, just because it takes that level of understanding of like what's actually going wrong here. How does this bug interact with other systems? What are the different possibilities for me to move laterally or vertically within this vulnerability to escalate it or to do XYZ? And if you don't have that, then it's really just like throwing darts like blindly at the wall and just like seeing what sticks and just like hoping for the best.
Yeah, I'll speak briefly to our audience here as well. Like this is another great example of something that we talk about really often, which is, you don't have to know programming to hack, but if you do know programming, you will find substantially better bugs because you'll understand at a deeper level what is happening and what, you'll be able to understand the exploits that are occurring, and you'll be able to go for things that are a little bit deeper. Most of the bugs that Alex submits, statistically even, are between high and crit, right? And on the crit side of high, between high and crit, looking from his HackerOne impact, right? He's got a 32.7 impact on HackerOne, which is phenomenal. And so this is. Just to be clear, we won't say that you have to know how to program to hack, but if you do, you will gain a much greater ability to find critical bugs. So that's a great takeaway. And Alex, bringing it back around to your sort of personal InfoSec history, you worked at Yahoo/Oath/ whatever the heck they want to call it in Verizon Media,
it was an interesting time.
Yeah, could you speak to a little bit about that experience? What were you doing there, and what kind of things did you learn?
So I was on their internal red team there. Mm-hmm. So that was, we were kind of every month or so be given an objective. Mm-hmm. And more often than not, it would be try and get access to the CISO's email and show how we could do that with internal knowledge. Mm-hmm. Sure. But we used to have with the issues that kind of Yahoo had previously, mm-hmm. there was always an assumption internally that internal access would be relatively easy to obtain from an attacker's perspective. So we would kind of go from that position of being an attacker with internal access and see what we could do in the internal network, and then obviously work with the various teams to get that fixed and see what other kind of defense in depth we could help to implement there.
So you mentioned that
how much of your go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So you mentioned that a lot of the hacking that you do is like in an IDE. It's looking at source code. It's looking at how stuff works. Has that always kind of been the case for you, just based on your background, or did you sort of pivot into that style of hacking after doing a lot of black box testing and all that kind of stuff, and just sort of figuring out that this was what you liked the most, or this was what worked the best for you?
Yeah, so that's always been my area of interest, and actually kind of going even lower down the stack into reverse engineering and debugging, and kind of binary exploitation as well. That was always my first InfoSec love, as it were. But there was very little opportunity to do that whilst doing kind of the audit style pen testing that I started out doing. So I remember for kind of months I'd be sitting in a data center with no internet connectivity, running Nmap against kind of a billion and one servers.
Oh man!
But I used that time to kind of read up on man pages in Linux and start to program more and tinker more. And then it was like, okay, so what have I got accessible to me? I've got Nmap. Okay, so let's learn everything I can about Nmap and how it works and what it's doing. And so I guess it's sort of the interest. If something piques my interest, I'm rabbit hole down there and we'll just stay there for months if I can.
That's so funny. I do the same thing when I'm like, whenever I'm in like a situation where I don't have many options for what I could be doing. I think a great example is when I'm sitting on a plane. I'll start to do things that I don't normally do. So I'll like read a book, or I'll like start to just like read through man pages or stuff like I'll just do like things that are like, you know, they consume time, but it's not necessarily the most interesting thing because I'm in this restricted sort of environment. And I feel like that's like the perfect intersection of like interest and opportunity breeds, you know, knowledge or information or however you want to build that equation.
Yeah, hugely.
Yeah, God forbid you pay that $12.99 for the internet on the flight so that you can answer emails or write tweets or whatever.
On the 8-hour flight, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I mean, I remember quite vividly, so literally sitting in a data center, no internet access, and the particular customer I was working for wanted us to leave our hard drives when we were done with the job. And it was kind of a 4-week job. And I was like, well, what am I going to do with my time? Because it was literally scanning. So I was like, well, I enjoy programming, so I'll just program something. And it was actually quite liberating writing this whole thing, knowing it was going to get thrown in the bin in a couple of weeks' time, and I couldn't take it with me.
Nice.
And that was programming purely for the joy and the challenge.
Wow.
Nice.
That's cool,
awesome.
Man. That is how growth happens, you know, when you're doing it for, like you were saying, for the joy of programming, for the passion of it. But so, you know, this was in going back to your experience at Yahoo and Oath, this is a red team sort of role. And as I understand, my personal experience, so anecdotally, is that when I was doing internal pen tests, I wasn't doing a lot of, which is different than red team, but, you know, correlated in some way. I wasn't doing a lot of exploitation or exploit development. I was doing a lot of pivoting around in the internal network. I was doing a lot of escalating of privileges inside the network in order to weave my way through, right? So I'm wondering, you know, how different that was at Yahoo internal red team, or if that skill set was developed elsewhere.
Yeah, so it was pretty similar in terms of the pivoting, and you kind of spend probably 70% of your time on post-exploitation.
Right.
And that was always the kind of prove what you can do. You've exploited the system, now prove what you can do with that.
Right.
But there was the kind of 30% of initial access, which was pretty fun exploitation. I remember, I'm sure it's fine to say this. My first week there, I wasn't set up properly and was just given the standard laptop. So no more privileges than anybody else would have. And by the end of the week, I had a remote code execution on Yahoo laptops.
Oh yeah, well that's awesome. Another one of those scenarios where you've got like limited scenarios, and you just kind of got to work within your environment, which is such a hacker mentality thing in general as well, because our whole job is to take, you know, that data center with no internet, that laptop, you know, that injection point where you can't use special characters, and figure out a way to break out of those constraints and get access to, you know, greater privileges. So I think, you know, I'm sure it was applicable in so many ways, but even just from a mentality perspective, that'll help you grow as a hacker and build that sort of mental resiliency you need to be able to push through almost any situation you're put in from a technical perspective. Yeah,
hugely.
Yeah.
And it was at Yahoo that I really first came across HackerOne as well. So that was my real pivot into bug bounty was through Yahoo, and I did everything I could to get on the team that was helping out with assessing impact of bugs that come in through the Yahoo program, and that's where I started to learn some of the bigger names on the Yahoo programs, and kind of seeing some of the stuff they were doing. I was like, I could do this.
Yeah. This is starting to click. So you then pivoted, you know, I guess maybe you were still on the internal red team, but you also did some work with the bug bounty program for Yahoo, and that's how you got exposed to HackerOne.
Yep. Yeah, hugely.
Gotcha. And then next in your flow was that you actually went and worked with HackerOne for a little bit, right? So how did that come about?
Yeah, definitely. As with most kind of job moves in this industry, I was in Vegas. And our good friend Martin Nickus took us out for a night at the Yahoo team out for a nice meal. And just had a bit of a chat with him afterwards, saying, "Hey, this HackerOne thing sounds quite interesting," and I think it kind of snowballed from there, and I was offered a job relatively shortly after that, and went to work for HackerOne in London as a kind of technical program manager.
And how did you like that in comparison to like, because leading up to this, you'd basically been doing purely technical roles, like lots of pen testing, lots of red teaming, lots of writing reports, that kind of stuff. And then you pivoted from that into like a technical adjacent role where you're managing programs. You're still very involved with like security and that kind of stuff, right? But it's a very different experience. What was that like?
It was challenging. It was, I knew HackerOne was a company that I wanted to be involved with, but it was a difficult role for me. It was a difficult leap. And then unfortunately had some kind of, my personal life took a bit of a turn, and that made work very, very difficult. So during my time at HackerOne, my wife and I found out we were pregnant. But unfortunately, very soon after we found out that the baby had Edwards syndrome, which is kind of chromosomal disorder, which meant they weren't going to make it.
That's terrible.
Sorry to hear that.
So that obviously took quite a lot of my attention away from my job. And HackerOne were fantastic throughout the whole thing. And then when it came to when the baby was born, I was given kind of 3 months paid bereavement leave, and went back to, I think I went into the office on the January the 3rd, 2019, and quit because I just couldn't do it.
Was that during that leave? During that leave, did you sort of like step back and reanalyze like where your job was at and how you were feeling about working and all that kind of stuff, or did that kind of all hit on the day you went back into the office?
Yeah, kind of day I went back into the office. It was the kind of period where I was off was very much about self-care and looking after my wife and family. And I realized I just wasn't ready to go back to work. And I didn't want to put HackerOne in a position of having somebody on salary who wasn't doing any work. So I kind of spoke to my team there and said, look, really appreciate everything, but I'm going to step back.
So was that day one of full-time bug bounty after
that? Not day one. I took a few more months, and then kind of realized I do need to start earning money. And that's where I thought, I should kind of pull my finger out and get starting. So I think it was like April. Yeah, actually, I think it coincided with the UK tax year, so April 6th or something. I was like, right, let's do this, give this a go, and see where we get.
Right. So your transition into bug bounty was a little bit, or full-time bug bounty was a little bit more strained than most people's. I think that, we've kind of talked in the past before about being in a full-time bug bounty position and the kind of mental stress that puts on somebody. And normally, I think you and I both agree that it's not prudent to go into that position without, a decent financial runway and a decent, or at least from my conversation, a decent home life setup and stuff like that. But that transition actually happened a little bit different for you. So what were the first couple months? Obviously, you were dealing with a lot of personal things as well, but from a work perspective, did you find it hard to focus, or were you kind of ready to get back into it after having taken an appropriate amount of time to, grieve and such, even though that, an appropriate amount can never be taken, but enough for you to get back into it?
Yes, so it was, I've been working in security, as I say, for would have been 12 years or something by that point. So security is a relatively well-paid industry. So I did have the financial backing to have to do it without risk. And my wife was going back to work around the same time as well. And she's a management consultant. So again, a relatively well-paid job there. So with the two incomes,
that's good,
and the money we had in the bank, it wasn't as much of a risk.
Sure.
I think I said to myself, I'll give it 3 months before I reassess, see how we get on. And if I need to get another job at the end of that, then I would start to look. But that was 4.5 years ago, and I haven't looked back.
So had you been thinking about doing full-time bug bounty or anything prior to that, or was it kind of just like in that time of your life you were just analyzing sort of the available options, things that you'd been doing, and it was kind of a logical step to just give it a shot and see what happens? Or had you kind of been toying with that in the back of your mind that, you know, I like bug bounty, I'm very involved in bug bounty, obviously working at HackerOne and doing Yahoo bug bounty program before that, you're, you know, very in the scene, you're very in the know, your mind is kind of in the right place? And was it kind of just like that natural progression, or was this something that had always been in the back of your mind for, you know, for a while?
Yeah, so whilst working at HackerOne, I was still hacking on programs that I wasn't managing. And I was using that as my kind of technical outlet whilst doing less technical work at HackerOne. I think it's difficult to say without how things could have been different. I very much believe in HackerOne and their kind of vision, so I could see that I would have stayed with them whilst keeping on hacking in the background, but difficult to say.
Did you experience a lot of challenges with that balance of like TPM and hacker? Because I've heard a lot of, on both sides of it, of like, you know, whether it's being a triager or whether it's working adjacent to triage or doing TPM or whatever at HackerOne, and also trying to do the hacking. And you mentioned that there are certain programs you can't hack on and that kind of stuff. Did you find that to be a real big hindrance that made you excited to no longer be working there? Or was it kind of just like, you know, if you were still working there, that's fine, you could have gotten around it and figured out how to hack outside of that?
Yeah, I don't think it was too much of a hindrance. I wasn't working on any of I think there was only 1 or 2 programs that I was working on that I personally would have had a huge amount of interest in hacking. And there are obviously a lot of programs available. So I don't think it would have been too bad. The bigger thing would have been the time and the energy. So obviously working for was primarily an American company on UK hours. You kind of have to be a lot more flexible with your time to fit in meetings with the States, certainly West Coast. So kind of end up working later in the evenings, which is when at the time I would have been hacking. So
for example, it's 9:30. It's 9:30 a.m. here in California.
Yeah,
and I imagine it's probably 5 or 6 p.m. in the UK.
Yeah, it's 5:30. So
half 5. What does that mean? Is that 5:30?
5:30.
Since it's 5:30 by this point.
That's one of my favorite UK expressions because it's, for Americans, it's extremely ambiguous as to what that means. Meanwhile, we say like quarter till, quarter after.
Yeah.
In Europe as well, in German, it would be 6:30 because they do 2:30 and we do 2:30.
Oh, wow. No way! Really?
Yeah.
Oh no, that's the worst. Wow. So you know, bring it back to, you know, this new stage of life you're in with full-time bug bounty. You've been I started in March of 2020 full-time bug bounty, and you started in April of 2019. So you've got a year on me, and there are very few people, I'll say, that have been able to sustain long-term full-time bug bounty. Yassine has done a great job of it. You've done a good job of it. You know, people often have a hard time with burnout and with, I guess, just the mental stress that comes along with it, even though their earnings might be good. So do you have any tips or tricks for people that are looking to get into full-time bug bounty and how to survive the mental tolls of that?
Yeah, I mean, the first one is get your finances in order.
Yeah.
I have a lot of people who come to me and speak to me about full-time bug hunting. I think I wrote something on it in 2020 maybe. And off the back of that, I've had a lot of conversations, but it's always make sure your finances in order. It's the first thing. It was a very low risk move for me because my previous experience and connections, I was pretty certain I could get a job quickly if I needed to. I also had, I'd say, over a decade of technical professional experience in security. So I knew what I was doing, and familiarity with HackerOne and some other bug bounty programs. So for people who want to get into it, first thing is just minimize your risk. Make sure you've got enough money in the bank. If you've got a bad run of things, that could be easily 3 months.
Easily.
You have a bad run of things. So if you're bug hunting to pay your next rent bill, that's not a good position to be in. And then on the kind of burnout side of things, for me personally, I work, well, when I am working, I'm just ramping back up again now. I work about 3 days a week. And I'm relatively strict with that because I do childcare the other couple of days while my wife works. And that gives me a lot of time away from the computer, so with my family, with my kids, which certainly helps. And I try to only hack on programs that I enjoy. I know I could make more money if I were to hack on things that didn't interest me, but I'm disciplined enough to say, I want to do this, and I want to feel the joy of doing this. If I sit down on my computer and dread what I'm doing that day, that's not where I want to be. And that's one of the big reasons I've not looked to go back into full-time work is I enjoy what I do, and I set the direction for what I do on a daily basis, and on the long term as well. Giving somebody else that power again, I would find very difficult.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's something that, I'm beginning to learn for myself now as well, is like, even though I have the freedom to work less hours, and certainly I do take more time off than I would be allowed if I were working, in an industry, if I had a traditional job. But the ability to say, all right, I'm actually going to work 4 days a week, or I'm going to work 3 days a week, is something that, as weird as it sounds, I haven't really considered up until this point. Especially with the other ventures that I have going on, sometimes it works out that way, but it's 4 days of hacking, 1 day of real estate, 3 days of hacking, 1 day of training, 1 day of real estate, or whatever, right? And so I think that's something that going into this next phase for me in 2024, I kind of want to set the goal of trying to cut my work hours down to, to 4 days a week, or maybe even 3 under your example here. And I think that will actually help a lot with lifestyle balance, because it is really easy to get hyper focused on bug bounty and to burn out on it really quickly. So yeah, that aspect of taking a break and having that built into your schedule, I think is very powerful.
Yeah, it's that, and it's the flexibility as well. So if you're having a bad day, just being able to say, nope, I'm done.
Yeah,
just walking away.
And I'm stubborn as shit about that. Like if I'm having a bad day, I'm like, no, the bad days are where, your true character is defined, and I just try to push through it. And my wife is like, you idiot. Like if you're having a bad day and you have the total flexibility to take it off, why would you work in an environment where you're like unhappy, uninterested, burnout? Like, why would you do that? Like, this is terribly inefficient. And she's so right. And so that's such a great lesson. And I'm glad to see that that's been producing, results for you as well.
Yeah, no, certainly. The flexibility is, that's something that I really value. So I can work normal working hours, or I can work kind of 10 p.m. through to 3 a.m. if I need to, or just take a day off and work on the weekend when everybody else has taken a day off. So you get to do everything so you get to, like, if you want to go do something, do it on a Wednesday, because nobody goes out on Wednesdays.
Right.
And than just work on a Saturday. So you don't have to compete with other people.
That's the other great thing, man, especially for people that like to travel, is like you can make that happen in the middle of the week, right? Especially if your partner can make it happen as well. It's so awesome to be able to just like show up to these sightseeing places and there's no one 100%. There, at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, and so what a great benefit that is as well.
Yeah. Sorry, I walked out of the room.
Oh, go ahead, Joel.
I walked out of the room, but I wanted to ask. So when you do work like three days a week or something, do you find that your workload sort of compensates back for a 5-day work week? So say you're working 40 hours a week, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Do you find that you're working like 12, 13, 14 hours on those 3 days?
I wish I could sometimes, but no, because you got young kids. It's very much. Some days it will be at 1 p.m. My wife needs to be online to do work. So that's my hard deadline. I'll take that, get the kids, go down the park, and that's it, me done for the day. I can pick it up maybe when they go to bed if there's something I'm right in the middle of. But it is relatively strict to 3 days a week, unless I want to kind of stay up late in evenings. And some evenings I will do that.
Nice. How do you
organize?
If I'm
really into it.
How do you organize when you have like, you're like working 4 hours, dip for 3 hours, come back, work for 3 hours, leave, hack for 2?
That was my next question.
Notes. How do you do that?
Yeah, badly. I think I'm getting better at note taking, and that's kind of been a big push this past couple of years. So I keep everything in GitLab. So I actually use project issue tracking for kind of leads, potential bugs, things I want to look at, and have that all in there. I'll write my whole reports in there and sign them off, and then copy them into the platform. And I found that works quite well because it also lets me, if I am away from the laptop and I have a really good idea, I can just jump on to GitLab, open a new issue, or append a comment to an issue that I'm working on. And that's been working relatively well. I've let it lapse a little bit recently because I haven't been working so much. But I need to get back into that kind of discipline.
Nice. That's such a developer-centric approach. I love that. I think it's it's funny because generally, like, I think a lot of developers, but myself especially, I'm very like in favor of running it yourself and like doing all that kind of stuff. But this is one of those cases where a cloud service or any type of like hosted whatever is so useful, because I do the same thing with like Notion that's what I use for my notes, where if I have something come up and I just am out on the street or I'm traveling or whatever and I just think of something, I can pull my phone out, I can open the app, I can jot it down in the notes, and then later when I'm in a position to be hacking, I can open up my Notion and I can go through and I can see the notes that I left for myself. And it's so useful to have just that instant being able to just write it down and then access it later, where, if you're hosting it yourself, you might be able to do that, but it's a lot more difficult and there's more loops you got to jump through and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. You know what's kind of odd to me is that a lot of the things that you're talking about, they seem really developer-y, for lack of a better word. But you've never been a developer. Is that accurate?
Not professionally, no.
Yeah. So your whole career has been, security, but there are a lot of correlations, which I think is very interesting and is probably sort of I imagine is a mindset. Just sort of base for you as far as that goes.
Yeah, and it's a discipline thing as well. I have the worst memory in the world. So if I don't write it down, I'll remember it in like 6 days' time when it's no use to me. So I do have to do that. And I also find if I don't write it down, I'll hyperfixate on it as well. Whereas if I write it down, I can put it to one side and focus on what I'm doing. Yeah. I've joked a couple of times in the past that I've found more bugs whilst lying awake in bed than I do at the computer.
Yeah.
But if I don't write it down at that point, I just won't sleep.
Yeah.
There's not hope in hell.
I think that's a great tip for anyone who needs to have a work-life balance with bug bounty. You know, if you're a single guy and you're just like really just trying to like freaking love the bug bounty. And I remember sitting, you know, before I was married and doing some hacking, and I would just hack for super long sprints, and I was just always in the zone, in the flow, go, go, go. But as I've, you know, realized the importance of work-life balance and you know, maintaining my other relationships, the ability to step away from the computer and not lose a bunch of, you know, obviously you're going to lose your mental context for sure, but before you can do that, if you can predict by, you know, setting a timer or whatever, you know, for 5 minutes or 10 minutes before you have to leave, writing down where you're at currently, and then being able to come back to that, I found it's a lot easier to get back in that flow state when you return to it. And it seems like that's what you've been thinking as well with sort of trying to get back into taking notes.
Yeah, hugely. Kind of my next step and progression on that this next year is to really flesh out methodologies for myself. So a lot of my bug hunting is either very ad hoc, or I find a particular type of bug and then look around for that bug on different programs. I'm not a very good, like, if you sit me down in front of a web app, I'll get bored within 3 seconds. But if I've got a methodology I know I can follow and that can help me pick out interesting things to look at, I think that will really help me. And then if I get some source code, rather than just looking for, I hyperfixate on code execution, because that's the real big bug. But there are hundreds of bugs I don't even bother looking for, which are really big impacts. So I'm going to, my goal for kind of 23, 24 is try and train myself and really formalize a lot of the things that I'm doing.
So that's a great segue right into your you know, bug bounty hunting methodology. Joel, did you have something you wanted to add before we move to that?
Well, I was just gonna say that's something that happens, I think. I certainly experienced it a lot, where it's like the things that I look for is like a sliding window, where over time, as I find new stuff that I find really interesting, or new techniques or whatever, like that's what I'm really looking for, like when I'm present and hacking. And things that I would look for even like 6 months ago or a year ago are just not as interesting or not as important, or not really what, like I might look for it if I happen to see something and be like, oh yeah, like, let me check for that. But oftentimes I'll be pivoting into like different exploitation techniques specifically and exclusively as I progress, and I'll just like kind of shift the things that I look for over time, instead of looking at every single thing that I've ever looked at ever in my entire history of hacking. How do you like manage that? Do you keep like notes of, you know, different categories, or there's a site we've talked about, Hack Tricks, that's kind of like this, where there's different categories for like XSS, what you could do in XYZ scenario. Like, do you have anything like that?
I have in the past, and I've lost several versions of it. I am trying to build it up again it's for bugs that interest me, and that's the key thing. I never want to be looking for every bug, because that's going back to audit, and that's not what interests me. But I personally find XSS really quite boring to look for. The only time I ever look for it is if I need an XSS to trigger an RCE or something like that.
Right.
Actually, I was talking to somebody the other day. So I've only found one SQL injection bug in my bug bounty career, and I was using that to trigger another more better bug. And
that's great. I love that.
Yeah,
they're just not bugs that interest me, because the fix is input validation or output encoding, and it's just not an interesting thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. So it sounds like generally when you're
very
hacking,
personal opinion.
Nice. Yeah, so when you're hacking, like you're not looking at the mediums and that stuff. Like what are you generally submitting? Is it pretty much highs and crits and very selective? Like I think like Justin and I have a slightly different methodology on this. Generally, like I'm very pick and choose about what I want to submit. I only really want to submit like super high quality, super high impact, as higher crit as I can get type vulnerabilities. And Justin views it more as like a volume is also important, especially when you do it full time. And so having a flow of mediums maybe not lows, but mediums especially, is like really important to keep a regular flow of income. And then working on those highs and crits is also obviously important just for big bonuses and all that kind of stuff.
Dude, I'll report a low. I don't give a shit. I'll
Okay,
report a
no,
low.
it's all on the table, I guess.
No, just sorry.
Yeah,
Continue, Alex. Sorry.
Yeah, so I definitely aim for the highs and the crits. I think my target is kind of around 1 or 2 higher crit a month on kind of the bigger paying programs, and that normally tides me over. I was looking at, I wrote this down somewhere. In 4.5 years, I've submitted under 200 bugs on HackerOne.
Yeah.
So I do go for very much for fewer and higher impact issues where I can. That kind of changes a little bit if we're talking about live hacking events, and then pretty much medium plus we'll go for those.
Yeah.
Again, I don't like taking the time to report lows. I often find reporting low issues is detrimental to spending the time on finding other issues. So.
Yeah. So on the
that
topic
makes sense. I just ran the numbers on that. It's that's four vulnerabilities per month on average, it seems.
That's pretty good.
Which is pretty
1 a week
for a full-time hunter. That is
for that
that's
impact is just
high
like,
quality you've got to be pushing out. Yeah.
So on the topic of LHEs,
and
how does that change like your hacking flow? Do you pretty much only do live hacking event prep, or how much are you doing typical standard program hacking versus jumping to LHEs?
So I kind of have a kind of all or nothing on live hacking events, and that's not just effort, that's performance as well. I've bombed in so many live hacking events, like only being able to report kind of 1 or 2 mega bugs, and I feel like out of necessity at that time, or I get 1 or 2 or 3 really high impact bugs.
Right.
And so my normal focus is kind of there, but it's a bit more muted. If I can get 1 really high impact bug in the live hacking event, I'm happy, and then I'll work around that. And again, that also depends on who's running it as well. If I'm really engaged with the customer, and I think Justin mentioned earlier, GitHub was a good example of that last year. As soon as they were announced as the customer, precisely. As soon as they were announced as the customer, I went all in on GitHub. So the normal live hacking event period is about 2 weeks of hacking once you know the full scope of the live hacking event. But as soon as the customer was announced, it's right, okay, all in. So I think I had about 4.5, nearly 5 weeks of hacking on them, and that paid off hugely for that event.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. And yeah, I remember the majesty of that performance. That will always be concreted in my mind as one of the greatest live hacking event performances I've ever seen. So congrats on that. And in conjunction with that, I want to talk a little bit about your bug hunting techniques, but also, let's look at specifically for live hacking events. So, you mentioned that you're focusing on high and critical bugs, and in live hacking events, you don't get to pick your target, right? Which I understand you're normally pretty picky about, because you have a specific set of a very particular set of skills that
I was going to say if you weren't.
Yeah, exactly. that you are going to use to hunt down the high and critical bugs, but that apply less well to other areas just by nature of how that is. So when you're going, can you explain to me a little bit about what kind of areas you're looking at? If there's any indicators to you of what might be interesting for these higher and critical bugs, because a lot of people are stuck in the area where they're finding mediums, lows, and the occasional high, but the crit is very elusive, and you're one of the people that consistently finds crits. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the first thing I'll look for is any kind of source code or desktop application that's in scope, or where, I think I mentioned earlier, or where they're using kind of open source modules that I can access the source on. That's my comfort zone. So as soon as I see something like that, I'll dive into it head first. Normally, if you see a desktop application in scope of bug bounty program, it'll be a Electron or Chrome embedded framework applications. So you can pretty much get the source out of them easily as well to go through. And then it's anything that kind of hits my, I guess, spidey sense of where an issue is. So any PDF rendering, any HTML rendering, I'll always spend time there. So I had a very productive kind of 6 months in the last year looking at headless browser exploitation. So that was kind of kicked off with H1702 last year, I think, in Vegas.
Yes, it was.
There was one target I was looking at that had was using headless Chrome to render some. Actually, it wasn't user input. This is one case where I did have to find a cross-site scripting. But I saw they were using an old version, so it was like, I do wonder if I could write an exploit for that. I've not written one for Chrome before, but let's see what I can do. So why not try and write a Chrome exploit under pressure in a few days? Because that sounds like fun.
Right.
But I was lucky enough there was enough information out there on this older version at the time to cobble something together, and did very well with that bug.
Yeah.
And that kind of gave me the itch for that sort of.
I was going to say, on that note, I'm sorry to interrupt, but at that time, that was something really impressive that not a lot of us had seen at the bug bounty scene. Because, you do see a lot of this stuff in sort of more of the pwn to own, or like just people that hunt for 0 days and don't do the competitions. You've seen those there, but that sort of browser exploitation wasn't something we had seen a lot of in the bug bounty scene before. So could you talk to me a little bit about how you went down that path of learning about browser exploitation, and how you did it so quickly to be able to write an exploit for this specific target in a couple days? That seems like quite a feat.
Yeah. So I've got modest experience with binary exploitation anyway, so I kind of understand all the principles of what you need to do. So bypassing ASLR. What to do when you've got control of the programming counter and all the rest of it. I kind of get those fundamentals, but I hadn't looked at a full-on browser JavaScript exploit before. The GitHub security blog had some really good posts on it about exploiting a very similar issue than the one I was trying to do. So I started reading up there. I can't remember the person's name who's writing these blogs, and probably butcher it if I did try to say it, but really detailed kind of exploitation steps of how they went about finding and exploiting some bugs. So that was a really good stepping stone to help me with that. And it was from that point on, when I knew it was possible, it was just sheer force of will and no sleep, I think, about.
Well, okay, so I'm glad you added that last bit, because I was like, in those situations, when I get in that situation, when I lock on, I'm like, I know this is possible. I got to get it done, right? Then that's when the rubber hits the road for that life balance stuff that I preach about all the time, right?
Yeah.
That's when I say, like, all right, am I going to just brain dump onto this notepad and then go to bed at a decent time with my wife? Or am I going to, sit here and write code till 3 a.m. in the morning? And so, I mean, I guess... No, I'm going to put you on the spot. Like, what happened that during that event? I mean, what did that life balance look like for you?
It was relatively good at the start of the event because I had no bugs and didn't have any leads. It was about halfway through the event that I came across this target and realized it was going to be vulnerable, and that's where it did kind of take over a bit.
Yeah.
But then you also have the kind of difference in that you're flying away from your family or your usual routine. So going out to Vegas, I had 8 hours on a flight and a laptop again. So it's like, right, okay, let's see what I can do there. I think by the time I landed, I had most of the primitives in place that I needed to be able to prove it was vulnerable.
Yeah.
And then from that point on, it was then trying to write a reliable exploit for the particular version in use, and really hammering that home. I remember, I think I got it at about 5 a.m. Vegas time. I finally popped it on the day of that. It was either the day before or the day of that particular customer.
So was it a full exploit to RCE, or was it just like a POC where it crashes or something?
So full exploit to RCE, but without a sandbox escape.
Okay.
So a large proportion of the time when you see headless browsers being used in a backend, the sandbox will have been disabled because it's easier to deploy that way, and that makes exploiting it so much easier.
Right.
I've only done one successful full renderer RCE through sandbox escape, and that was fun. I'm not interested in doing that again if I can avoid it.
Yeah, so I am curious, like, do you think it's worth it taking it that last like couple inches? Because I've reported something very similar. We got paid for it at a live hacking event. I think I can say who it was. It was Meta. It was a hardware device, and it was using an outdated Chromium browser, essentially. And so what we did was we found a POC for that same version range, and it was able to successfully crash it, but we didn't decide that it was really worth the effort to like push it just that last couple inches to go from crash, definitely valid, like you could take this further, to all the way to like full RCE POC. Do you think that it's worth it to do that, or will the company kind of understand, and this is kind of company by company, but generally, do you think it's worth it to like spend all that time and effort developing a full working POC, or is it good enough to say, here's a CVE for the V8 engine, it applies to this version, we can see that it crashes with this POC, you can connect the dots?
In my experience, every time I haven't had a full RC POC, I've been like, it's been downgraded to a medium or fobbed off. The recent live hacking event, I had one with I just submitted the POC. I was like, this would be a Herculean effort to get to RCE, and they were like, yeah, here's $200.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So,
oh my gosh.
The benefit, and this is what I really found last year, was that once I had one, and people learned that I had one, they would come to me and say, oh, I've got this one over here. Have you got an exploit for that? And if I didn't, but I thought there was one that I could, again, develop, I would go away and would do that. So I think in the end, last year, I wrote 4 Chrome render RCEs, a Phantom JS RCE, and a WK-HTML to PDF RCE. And each one of those got used at least twice.
Wow.
In collabs as well, which kind of really helped, because once it's there, it's no effort for me to say, or very little effort, change the version numbers and some offsets.
Right.
Wow. So this is sort of like the reverse Today is New. Is like, you know, you go to Today is New when you need a subdomain takeover, or an XSS on a subdomain, or like, you know, like some sort of cookie inject, you know, or it's some lower level bugs that will help you build a greater chain. And you go to Alex Chapman when you need a crazy, you know, super exploit for your, you know, vulnerable-ish looking browser renderer that's happening. That's really cool, because that model really does work. We've seen it time and time again. At one of the last live hacking events, Eric took first place without having a single report that was his own. It was all collaboration, which was just absolutely legendary and made bug bounty history about what the power of collaboration, you know, has. So it's cool to see the flip side of that as well with you. And I think that speaks to your experience within collaboration as well, because you collaborate a lot with a specific set of people at live hacking events. And I'm sure that helps the scenarios where, you know, you, like you've mentioned, your bug bounty experience is kind of up and down like that. So could you talk a little bit about that collaboration experience and how it's helped you grow as a hunter and also as it's helped your performance in live hacking events?
Yeah, I mean, it's collaborating in live hacking events is always a lot more fun than doing it on your own anyway.
Yeah.
And that's kind of one of the things I always fall back on.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy my job and I want to enjoy my job.
Mm-hmm.
So it's fun to just get together with a group of friends and go at it. But also the hackers who I've been working with on a few events, so Archangel, Rezo, and DC,
Mm-hmm.
they all have different areas of interest and focus than me. So if I fail to get my one critical, then between them they've got 50 or 60 reports in that we can profit through. But if I get my one big bug, then it goes the other way. So it's been a really good way of working for me recently, certainly in live hacking events.
And I bet that helps as well with your growth as a hacker when it comes to like being able to see other hackers and their style as well, because you mentioned before that you're not as strong in the traditional web vulnerabilities, and having someone like, you know, Archangel and Rezo, people that have strong web backgrounds, and then having access to those reports as well is, I'm sure, just a great learning opportunity. And then vice versa for them, being able to see your deeply technical source code powered, mega crits, I'm sure helps them grow as well.
Yeah, and that's kind of part of the thing as well. If you're not learning while doing bug bounty, you're doing something wrong. It's you kind of always want to be trying to improve yourself and your skill sets, and collaboration is one of the easiest ways to kickstart that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So for like the binary exploitation side versus source code review, do you find that you're doing a lot more of the binary exploitation, or what kind of stuff are you really focusing on now?
I do less binary exploitation than I'd want. It's always a lot more involved, and it's got a lot higher costs to doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So whilst I would love to have that be my main area of focus, one, I don't think I'm skilled enough in it, and two, it's not as reliable income as source code review and other forms of testing. So if it was just down to me, every other week I'd be doing binary exploitation and filling in other areas in between. But I'm not quite their skill level yet, I don't think.
So we've talked about this a little bit when we talked about source code review. We had a whole episode about it. But when you do your source code review, is it more of like a sort of outside-in approach or an inside-out approach? Meaning, do you find interesting like syncs, like there's a command being run here, or do you say, here's a public endpoint that looks like it might have juicy functionality. Let me see how I can connect these two together. How do you sort of approach a code base when you're looking for those really high criticality vulnerabilities?
Yeah, so I tend to focus on the syncs and then work backwards from there. So as I said, I kind of hyper focus on code execution wherever I can, and be that through command injection, deserialization, writing arbitrary files, that sort of thing. That always kind of piques my interest, and that's where I spend my time. I over focus in those areas, so I know I could be finding a lot more bugs if I looked a bit more generally. And again, that's kind of one of my goals for this next year or two. But also to bring in more automation into my kind of source code review and binary reverse engineering. So I've been playing around with CodeQL, SemGret, Yearn, and a few others to kind of help with that and build up a methodology there.
Yeah. Where do you draw the line?
Go ahead, Joel.
There's a crazy audio delay, so it's like we keep talking over each other. Where do you like draw the line in terms of when you're going sort of inside out, right? Like if you have something that looks like code execution and you've flushed out sort of what you think are all the paths, there's always kind of that possibility that you might be misunderstanding something, or there might be a connection somewhere else. Where do you draw that line and say, okay, it's time to move on and look at the next sync?
Normally based on my frustration level. If I've been hammering on it, if I've been hammering on it for a couple of days and really can't see any future in it, then I'll try something else, and I'll probably go back to it for a couple of days later on. So take a break, go back to it, and then sometimes I'll just outright think, no way that's going to be exploitable. And then somebody like Vax will come along and exploit the exact same thing that I was looking at.
I hate that, man. I freaking hate it when Vax does that.
He did it on one of the GitLab bugs. Exif tool. I was looking at Exif tool. Like, I checked the logs. I was looking at it about 2 weeks before he submitted his RCE in it. I was like, I can see shelling out here, but there's no way to get access to it, so I'm just going to move on. And then saw that, I was like, oh, that's a big bug.
Man, that stings. And I just want to go back to what you were saying before, when Joel asked about sources and syncs. That we've asked that question a couple of times. We've discussed it ourselves as well, and I think this is the first time we've had a really solid, like, no, I go to syncs, sort of response, like, first. And I think that's really cool. And I think that shows that methodology is absolutely, an appropriate methodology, a methodology that produces really good results. And I think I tend to be on the flip side of that. And I like to try to go look at the sources, see where I can inject, my input, and then go down all of the routes, and it may be because I don't have as good of a perspective on, which syncs lead to code execution. Like, I've recently been talking about configuration file injection, and just sort of, if you can inject into a templated configuration file, right, that there's a lot of chances for RCE there, because there's this switch of context between your current service and then the service that it's building with that configuration file.
Yeah, hugely.
And so I think maybe in the beginning, it might be helpful for people to look at sources, and then as they gain more experience, they should look at syncs. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really different approaches for different people. I know what I'm looking for when I'm looking at a source repository. Again, sometimes to my detriment, because I will focus on it. But I've had 2 recent examples. I've been doing quite a lot of work on JDBC drivers recently. So looking at what can be done with them, and there were 2 JDBC drivers I found out there that I was able to find had arbitrary file rewrite in. So that if you can get this to connect to a server, the server just read anything off the connecting system, or write anything to the connecting system. And I found those specifically because I was looking for the particular file writes and other things, and then worked back from there, working up the protocol stack, then being, right, can I access this? Yep. Okay. Can I access this? Yep. Okay. Can I access this? Yep. Okay. So if I implement a custom Diffie-Hellman key exchange, I can get through to this bit. So working backwards really helps me rather than working from the input.
Yeah. I think this is something that I've actually seen, and this actually goes to a bug that I want to talk about later, which is our bug collision we had at a live hacking event earlier this year.
I still haven't forgiven you for that.
And we'll get to that, but I want to talk about this whole concept of, having a protocol connect and then have that, reverse connection back to the client have some effect on the client. But you piqued my interest when you talked about those connection pieces. So anything you want to share, any little tidbits that you want to throw out there with regards to that?
I mean, yeah, generally the security boundary when a client connects to a server is less than when a server talks back to a client, if that makes sense.
Right.
So there's a lot of programs assume that the client will only ever be used in an authorized way to connect to an authorized server. Whereas if you can get a client to connect to a server you control, you generally have a much more privileged access to be able to do things. And I'm alluding to the bug that I know Justin wants to talk about, but I found that exact same bug in 4 or 5 different client applications. Because the original developers thought nobody's ever going to stick this on a server and connect to an untrusted server with it.
Right.
Or stick it in the backend and connect to an untrusted server. And then kind of cloud CI/CD comes along, and we're all using Git and SVN and Mercurial and Perforce and other things to connect to untrusted servers. And it's similar with kind of no-code, low-code environments. Okay, let's let the customers connect to their own databases. So here, just give us a database connection string, and we'll go connect to your database and pull the data from you. And a lot of the clients just weren't designed with that security boundary in place.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting place to be looking for bugs. And again, it kind of fits if it's a client, you can normally get hold of the software, you can reverse engineer it, or look it up on GitHub.
So I'll that definitely is a excellent tip for anyone looking for high impact bugs there. If there's a database connection that is being sent from the server to your database or something of the like, great stuff there. But I wanna go back to that JDBC piece that you said, so let's say I've got a JDBC configuration injection, right? Where I can have it connecting out to my DB. I'm not gonna prevent you from sharing your research here, but any specific directions you want to point us in, or are we looking for a blog post in the future, or are we keeping our cards close to our chest on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still actively exploiting a few of these issues,
okay.
So keep a little bit there.
Well, hey, the audience can't tell me I didn't try, because I tried for you, audience. So.
Well, I think generally, if you can change the query string parameters on a JDBC, or if you can control the query string parameters on the JDBC connection, you can do quite a lot. A few of the connectors are getting better. So I think which was it? Not DB2. One of not MariaDB, MySQL, or DB2. Name escapes me, but they've had 2 CVEs raised against them recently for this kind of exact same issue. And one was being able to specify the location of a log file through a query string parameter, which meant you could write arbitrary file output out. And another one was a JNDI injection, which is similar to the log4j.
Interesting.
Exploitation.
Very cool.
Was the log4j what kind of led you down this whole rabbit hole of looking at JDBC, or?
No, I actually picked this up a few years before that came out, and then when that came out again, it kind of led me down that path again. So
nice.
Yeah, he was an early adopter with those sort of roles.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say, if I'd had log4j, that would have been a good payday.
Yeah, a lot of near misses here, Alex. Like, come on, man. Like,
I need to start hanging around Alex more. Just everything that Alex goes, I'm gonna write that down.
Yeah, write that down right away. So I think we're running to a close here on time, but I did want to talk about this bug, and I think it's enough in the past now that we can kind of talk about it a little bit. This was a bug at a live hacking event earlier this year, and it was a RCE that, and this is the thing that makes me sad too, is that this is a blog post that Alex wrote up on a specific vulnerability in a specific protocol, Perforce, and I, to be fair to myself, using other resources and Alex's blog, I found an RCE on this target, the shared target that we had, and then I submitted the report before Alex did. So he duped, and we split the bounty, right? Because it's a live hacking event dupe. But it was a really great example of the way that Alex thinks, and what we were talking about earlier with blogging about things that you're passionate about. And a perfect example of this client server trust sort of situation that we have, because that's where the vuln was. And Alex, I don't recall whether I sent you this specific vulnerability before we started recording the podcast. Do you want to talk to the technical details of this vuln? Do you have it fresh enough in your mind, or do you want me to take a stab at it and you can kind of supplement?
Yeah, I think I've actually been looking at it again recently for something else, so it is.
Oh, what? Okay, all right. Talk us through it, man. Talk us through it.
This is an interesting one. But it's again, so for those who don't know, Perforce is a version control system, so similar to Git or SVN, that's heavily used in the gaming industry because it works really well with very large files. So if you've got really large assets, 3D models, that sort of thing. And it's a very typical example of the client trust that we mentioned before. So all the Perforce client really does is connect to the server, and the server then says, run this command. And then, so the server will say, okay, show me what files you've got, check the hashes of the files against the files I've got. So rather than it being client controlled, it's server controlled. And that was the first thing that kind of got my interest. I was like, well, how does it give you new files that you don't have on your system? And it turns out it just sends I think the command is literally send file or write file.
Client-write file is what I have in my report right here, which is just gold. I love that.
Sounds interesting. Yeah. So then seeing that, like, okay, right, how are we going to go about testing this? So what do? Break out Python and then start trying to reverse engineer the protocol as it's going on the wire and Wireshark and building it up byte by byte, bit by bit, to a point where I pretty much had a fully functioning Perforce server written in Python to kind of handle the auth, do all the rest of it to get it to the point where with just a login, it would be able to write an arbitrary file on the connecting system. And that was great. So I think just in saying this bug collision on the live hacking event, I kind of have a bit of a blasé attitude to submitting these bugs that I don't think anybody else is going to submit in live hacking events. And this one, I wasn't going to submit in the dupe period. I was like, nobody's going to find that.
Dude. That would have been a nightmare, man.
Yeah, I'll prove it after the dupe period closes because nobody else will find it. And I was like, I've got a little bit of time. I'll get it in.
Holy moly.
And then when I found out it'd been duped, I was like,
yeah, I'm going to start submitting everything to the dupe period.
Yeah,
right.
As soon as it was duped, I went to the triage and I was like, can you let me know who duped?
Who was it?
I want to have a word.
It was and it was, I want to say, on your team as well. You guys took bets on who it was, right?
Yeah.
And who was it that guessed it was me? One of them correctly guessed that it was me. Was it?
Yeah, it might have been Douglas.
I want to say it was Douglas as well.
Yeah.
So I appreciated that vote of confidence. It is one of the highest honors in my bug bounty career to have duped an Alex Chapman bug. So I'm sorry for using your own blog post against you, but yeah.
I've completely forgotten I'd written that, to be honest. So
did you really? No way.
Yeah.
So you didn't even reference back to it when you had. Oh my gosh. Wow, that's crazy.
That's awesome.
And so I just wanted to go to what you were saying. You wrote out a full Perforce server, and I'm looking at my exploit right now, and I love that experience of writing out like a binary level protocol for these sort of things. And you said that handles the auth and stuff like that. I'm looking at my code and it handles the auth. It's just like yeah, don't mind that. It connects to the server. You're like no, it's fine. Yes, you got it correct.
Yeah.
And then you just yes, we're connected. Here's the code. Run. And it's just a fun vulnerability type for sure. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, I think Joel has to bounce to a meeting. So we'll bring it to a close here. Alex, you can, for all of you that are listening, you can find Alex on Twitter at AJX Chapman, on HackerOne at AJX Chapman, ajxchapman.github.com, everywhere AJX Chapman. Alex, thanks so much for coming on, man. Did you have anything that you wanted to say as we sign off?
I appreciate the work you guys are doing on the podcast. It's a good one. I've had to stop listening while I walk the dog though, because I've got to take too many notes. So
yeah,
we get that feedback often. So maybe we need to stay on top of getting our notes out that accompany the episodes, and hopefully that'll make for a little bit more of a leisurely listening experience.
Definitely.
But
all right.
Yeah,
well, thanks so much
awesome
again.
And with you.
Yeah, go ahead, Joel.
Yeah, no, it was awesome chatting with you. Thanks for coming on, and we'll probably be collabing at some point in the future.
Oh yeah, we will.
Sounds good.
Peace.
All right.
Cheers.